The Montana sun hung low and merciless over the Clearwater River that afternoon, turning its surface into a sheet of blinding copper. Most folks in Redemption County knew better than to cross at the bend during spring runoff, when snowmelt from the mountains turned the gentle stream into a churning beast. But Eleanor Hartwell wasn't most folks. She was a woman with nothing left to lose. The black mare had been her husband's favorite. Tom had died 6 months ago, crushed under a fallen oak while clearing their north pasture, and Eleanor had been selling off pieces of their life ever since. The mare was supposed to fetch enough money to keep the ranch through winter, maybe longer. But the buyer lived on the far side of the river, and Eleanor's grief had made her reckless. She'd urged the horse into the water despite the current's roar, despite the way the animal's eyes had rolled white with fear. They made it halfway before the river decided to claim them both. The current seized them like a giant's fist. Eleanor felt herself torn from the saddle, the reins burning through her palms as she tried desperately to hold on. Then she was under, the world a roaring brown chaos, her heavy riding skirts dragging her down like anchors. Water filled her nose, her mouth. She clawed toward what she thought was the surface, but the river spun her like a rag doll, and she couldn't tell up from down anymore. So this is how it ends, she thought with strange clarity. Tom, I'm coming. Then hands, strong, sure hands, gripped her shoulders and hauled her upward into the light. She broke the surface gasping, choking, her vision swimming. Someone was pulling her toward the shore with powerful strokes, fighting the current that still tried to claim her. She glimpsed a weathered face, intense blue eyes, a black cowboy hat somehow still miraculously on his head. Then her feet scraped bottom, and he was lifting her, carrying her up the muddy bank and laying her on solid ground. Eleanor coughed up what felt like half the river, her body shaking violently. The stranger knelt beside her, his hands steady on her back as she heaved and sputtered. "Easy now," he said, his voice like gravel wrapped in honey. "You're safe. Just breathe." When she could finally focus, she looked up at her rescuer. He was perhaps 40, with lines carved deep around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. His clothes were soaked through, water streaming from his hat, but his eyes held a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "The mare," Eleanor managed to croak. "Made it to the other side," he said. "Saw her climb out downstream. She'll be all right." He paused. "You nearly weren't." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of that truth settle over her. A stranger had just risked his life to save hers, a life she'd barely been holding on to anyway. They sat by the fireplace as the storm raged outside, and Sarah found herself talking in ways she hadn't in years. Not the measured, strategic communication of boardrooms, but real conversation, messy, honest, human. She told James about the diagnosis, about the fear that had sent her driving west with no destination in mind. She talked about her life in New York, the success that suddenly felt hollow, the relationships she'd sacrificed for partnership meetings and client dinners. "I've spent my whole life building something," she said, staring into her coffee. "And now I don't know if any of it matters. I don't even know who I am when I'm not being a lawyer." James listened without interrupting, the way people rarely did anymore. When she finally fell silent, he stood and walked to a bookshelf, returning with a worn leather journal. "My wife kept this," he said quietly. Her name was Emma. The past tense wasn't lost on Sarah. She looked at the journal, then at James's face, and saw the shadow of old grief there. "She died 4 years ago. Cancer." He said the word simply, without flinching. She was 31. We'd only been married 3 years. "James, I'm so sorry." He nodded, opening the journal to a page marked with a dried wildflower. "She wrote something during her last month. I'd like to read it to you, if that's all right." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. James's voice was steady as he read. "I used to think life was about the destination, the career milestones, the house we'd buy, the children we'd have someday. But now I understand that life has only ever been about this, the morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, the way James's hand feels in mine, the sunset turning the hills gold, the sound of rain on the roof. Life is every small moment we choose to be fully present for. And I've had thousands of them. I am wealthy beyond measure. The words hung in the air between them, profound in their simplicity. Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but for the first time since her diagnosis, they weren't tears of fear. She taught me that suffering can be a teacher, James continued, closing the journal gently. Not because it's good or fair, but because it strips away everything that doesn't matter. It shows you what's real. They talked deep into the night, as the storm slowly exhausted itself outside. James shared stories of Emma, her laughter, her courage, the way she'd faced death with more grace than most people faced an ordinary Tuesday. He told Sarah about the ranch, how working with his hands and caring for animals had saved him in the aftermath of loss. How solitude had taught him to hear himself think, and silence had become a friend rather than something to fill. Sarah found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. How she'd grown up poor, had clawed her way through law school working 3 jobs, how success had become armor against the poverty she'd escaped. How she'd convinced herself that vulnerability was weakness and that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. I've never really let anyone in, she admitted. I've had relationships, but I always kept part of myself locked away. I thought that made me strong. And now? James asked. Now I think maybe it just made me lonely. As midnight approached, the storm finally broke. Through the window, Sarah could see stars emerging in patches of clear sky. James showed her to the guest room, a cozy space with a handmade quilt and curtains that smelled of lavender. Thank you, Sarah said at the door. For listening. For understanding. James nodded. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day. But as he turned to leave, Sarah felt panic rise in her chest. The room suddenly seemed too quiet, too empty. All her fears came rushing back, the diagnosis, the treatment ahead, the uncertainty of her future. She'd been running from solitude, and here she was, alone with her thoughts in a stranger's house. James. Her voice came out small, frightened. He turned back, his expression concerned. You all right? The words tumbled out before she could stop them. I've never shared a bed. Not really. I've had encounters, relationships even, but I've never actually slept beside someone all night. Never let myself be that vulnerable. She laughed shakily. Isn't that pathetic? 32 years old and I've never known what it's like to fall asleep feeling safe with another person. The storm warnings came on the 8th day. Thomas had lived in Dakota Territory long enough to read the signs, the strange greenish cast to the sky, the oppressive stillness, the way the cattle clustered together nervously. He'd seen storms that could flatten buildings and drive rain sideways hard enough to strip paint from wood. We need to prepare, he told Eleanor at breakfast. There's a bad one coming. She looked out the window at the deceptively calm morning. How bad? Bad enough that we could lose livestock. Maybe buildings. He paused. In extreme cases, people. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but she set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. Tell me what to do. They spent the morning in furious preparation. Thomas moved the cattle to a protected valley while Eleanor secured everything that could blow away, tools, loose boards, even the laundry that had been drying on the line. She worked with focused intensity, following his instructions exactly and anticipating needs before he voiced them. We need to bring the horses into the barn, Thomas called out as the wind began to pick up. They'll panic if the storm hits with them in the corral. Eleanor was already moving toward them, speaking in low, soothing tones that somehow calmed the nervous animals. Thomas watched in amazement as she led the most skittish mare, a horse that usually trusted no one, into the barn without incident. You're good with animals, he observed. Animals are honest, Eleanor replied. They don't pretend to be something they're not. The barb wasn't lost on Thomas, but there was no time to address it. The wind was strengthening by the minute, and the sky had turned an ominous dark gray shot through with sickly yellow. "Get inside the house," Thomas ordered. "I need to secure the barn doors." "I'll help." "No." The word came out harsher than he intended. "Please, Eleanor. Just go inside. I can't worry about you and the ranch both." For a moment, he thought she'd argue, but she simply nodded and ran for the house. Thomas finished battening down the barn, his heart racing as the first fat raindrops began to fall. The storm hit like a physical blow. Thomas barely made it to the house before the full fury unleashed. Wind screamed around the building with a sound like 1,000 demons, and rain hammered down so hard he couldn't see the barn just 50 feet away. Lightning cracked across the sky in blinding sheets, and thunder followed so quickly the sound was nearly continuous. Inside, Eleanor had lit lamps and was methodically checking windows, stuffing rags around frames where wind whistled through. She'd moved furniture away from the walls and placed buckets strategically under spots where the unfinished roof might leak. "Smart thinking," Thomas said, having to shout over the storm's roar. A tremendous crack split the air, and something massive crashed nearby, close enough to shake the house's foundation. Eleanor grabbed the doorframe to steady herself, her face pale but composed. "Was that the barn?" she asked. "I don't know. Could be a tree." The wind reached a fever pitch, screaming like a living thing. Thomas saw the walls actually bow inward under the pressure, and for the first time, genuine fear gripped him. He'd built this house himself, but what if it wasn't strong enough? Eleanor appeared at his side, pressing a cup of water into his hands. "The house will hold," she said with certainty. "You built it well. I can see the quality of the workmanship." Her faith in him, unexpected and complete, steadied his nerves more than any whiskey could have. "Stay away from the windows," he told her. "If the glass breaks." The words were cut off by an explosion of sound as the kitchen window shattered inward, spraying glass across the floor. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back, the storm, the conversation, the unexpected intimacy of sleeping beside someone for the first time in her life. She found James in the kitchen, making breakfast with the easy competence of someone who'd been caring for himself for a long time. He smiled when he saw her, that same gentle expression that seemed to be his natural state. "Morning. Roads should be clear enough to get you back to your car in a few hours." Something in Sarah's chest tightened at the thought of leaving. This place, this man, this unexpected sanctuary, she wasn't ready to return to her regular life, to face what waited for her. But as they ate breakfast together, Sarah realized something had changed. She wasn't the same person who'd knocked on his door last night. The fear was still there, the uncertainty about her future, but it no longer felt like it was suffocating her. "What will you do?" James asked, reading her thoughts in that uncanny way of his. "After you leave here?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "I'll go back to New York. Start treatment. But I think I'm going to make some changes too. Smaller caseload. More time for things that matter. Maybe call my sister. We haven't spoken in 2 years over something so stupid I can't even remember what started it." James nodded approvingly. "Emma would have liked you." The statement was so simple, so sincere, that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again. "I wish I could have met her." "In a way, you did. Everything good in me, she helped create." After breakfast, James drove Sarah to her rental car in his pickup truck. The landscape looked scrubbed clean by the storm, every color more vivid, the air impossibly fresh. They didn't talk much during the drive, but the silence was comfortable, the silence of people who understood each other. When they reached her car, miraculously undamaged despite its muddy predicament, James helped her dig it out. As she prepared to leave, Sarah felt the weight of goodbye settling over her. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You gave me something last night that I didn't even know I needed." "You gave me something too," James said. Reminded me why Emma wanted me to keep living. So I could meet people like you. So I could share what she taught me. Sarah hugged him then, holding on perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Will I see you again? James smiled. I think you will. The universe has a way of bringing people back together when they're meant to find each other. As Sarah drove away, she watched James in her rearview mirror until he disappeared from view. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again, but somehow that didn't matter. What mattered was that for one night, she'd let someone see her completely, vulnerabilities and all. And the world hadn't ended. In fact, something had begun. 6 months later, Sarah stood in her smaller, sunlit apartment in Brooklyn. She'd left Manhattan and the big firm, started doing pro bono work for people who needed help but couldn't afford her old rates. Her treatment had gone well, the doctors were optimistic. Her sister Julia was visiting for the weekend, their relationship rebuilt one honest conversation at a time. On her desk sat a framed photograph she'd taken that morning after the storm, the Triple Creek Ranch bathed in golden light, looking like something out of a dream. Beside it, a letter that had arrived yesterday, James's distinctive handwriting on the envelope. Sarah, it read. I hope this finds you well. The ranch is beautiful this time of year, wildflowers everywhere, just like the ones Emma loved. I'm thinking of opening this place up, maybe to people who need healing. A kind of sanctuary. Would you consider coming back to help me plan it? Not as a lawyer, just as a friend. Just as yourself. With hope, James. Sarah held the letter against her heart, smiling through her tears. Out her window, the Brooklyn streets bustled with life. People rushing to appointments, lovers walking hand in hand, children laughing on their way to school. Every small moment, she thought, remembering Emma's words. Every moment an opportunity to be fully present. She sat down and began to write her response, yes. Because sometimes the storms that knock us off course are exactly what we need to find our way home. Not to a place, but to ourselves. To the truth that we are not meant to carry our burdens alone, that vulnerability is not weakness but the greatest courage. That sharing our hearts, our real, messy, frightened, hopeful hearts, is what makes us human. And humanity, in all its beautiful imperfection, is the only thing that can save us. Sarah had learned that lesson in a single night, from a cowboy who smiled like he knew the secrets of survival, that love is not about possession but presence, that strength is found in gentleness, and that sometimes the most profound connections happen when we stop pretending to be invulnerable and start being real. She'd never shared a bed before that night. But she'd shared something far more intimate, the truth of who she was, all the broken and beautiful pieces. And in return, she'd been given the gift of being seen, truly seen, and accepted completely. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.